Hey everyone, this is MusicTechHelpGuy. Well, it's that time of year again, and in this video, I'll go over my top 10 plugins for mixing and mastering for 2018. This will be my third year doing a video like this, and like last year, some plugins have changed. So this should go without saying, but this video is simply my own personal opinion. These are 10 plugins for mixing and mastering that I use on a daily basis and that I cannot live without. Some are expensive, some are cheap, but I use these almost every day for mixing, mastering, and other audio work. Like always, a few disclaimers. 1. No plugins for vocal tuning, time alignment, or drum replacement are going to be on this list. Although I do use plugins like Melodyne, Auto-Tune, Vocal Line, and the Slate Trigger plugin on a regular basis, these are more for audio editing, not mixing. Number 2, no software instruments. This isn't about music production and composing using synthesizers and sample-based instruments. This is purely mixing and mastering plugins, so no synthesizers or software instruments will be included on this list. Number 3, no plugins that require dedicated hardware like the UAD plugins from Universal Audio, for example. So let's take a look at last year's list. These are in no particular order. Kush Clairphonic, Sound Radix Drum Leveler, FabFilter Pro-L, Waves H-Delay, Waves API 2500, Valhalla Shimmer, Valhalla Vintage Verb, iZotope Neutron Advanced, iZotope Ozone Advanced, and Antares AVOX Choir Evo. So here are the plugins that stayed on the list for this year. Sound Radix Drum Leveler, FabFilter Pro-L, Waves API 2500, Valhalla Shimmer, and iZotope Ozone Advanced, but version 8. Now keep in mind, plugins that didn't stay on the list this year are not bad plugins. They're all fantastic tools for mixing and mastering. I create this list based on what I find myself constantly using on mixes and mastering work over the past year. So that's why some are replaced, because some of these new plugins I find myself not being able to live without. So this year I've collectively replaced Clairphonic, H-Delay, Neutron, and Choir with the GULLFOSS EQ from Soundtheory, Waves Renaissance VOX, and iZotope Nectar 3. Now these three plugins aren't direct replacements for the previous four, but the collective workflow that I used to do with Clairphonic, H-Delay, Neutron, and Choir, I can now do better with GULLFOSS, Renaissance VOX, and Nectar 3. Valhalla Vintage Verb has been replaced by the Spaces II reverb from EastWest. And I've also added Decapitator from Soundtoys to the list. Decapitator is a saturation distortion plugin, so obviously it's not really a replacement for anything on the list. I just had a spot to fill, and I've been using Decapitator a lot on mixes for the last few years, and it's now a necessity for me for saturating bass and guitar buses, and I actually use it quite a bit now to saturate vocals as well. So those are my top 10 plugins for mixing and mastering for 2018. Next, I'll demonstrate each of these and talk about how and why I use each of these plugins in no particular order. Number 1, the GULLFOSS EQ from Soundtheory. GULLFOSS is an automatic intelligent equalizer. This thing is super useful as both a channel EQ, bus EQ, or a master EQ. It's not like other EQs because there aren't any fixed bands to be controlled. It's really pretty crazy because GULLFOSS is like a band fluid EQ. It adapts the gain, attenuation, and frequencies to your signal. GULLFOSS identifies and resolves problems in the frequency balance of your signal while giving you the ability to recover or tame frequencies, brighten the signal, or boost the signal. GULLFOSS is absolutely my favorite new EQ plugin. Number 2, Sound Radix Drum Leveler. This is still my favorite compressor and gate for mixing drums. Its visual interface gives you the ability to set a threshold for compression and apply upward compression to bring out the transients in your drum recordings. In addition, you can gate out the bleed in the close mics. I find this particularly useful for the close mics on the kick, snare, and toms. Number 3, FabFilter Pro-L. I only use one limiter plugin when I master, and it's the FabFilter Pro-L. It's typically the last thing in my mastering chain, and it allows me to bring my masters up to a competitive loudness level without gargling them with noise. There's 4 different limiting styles, although I typically use the transparent style when mastering. There's attack, release, and channel linking controls, oversampling for higher quality limiting, built-in dithering, noise shaping, and inner sample peak detection. This limiter is a must for mastering. Number 4, Waves Renaissance Vox, or RVox. This is another one that I've used for years, but never quite made it on the list. RVox is such a simple plugin for vocals. There's a gate, a compressor, and an output gain control, and all of these are tailored for vocals. This is a great transparent dynamics plugin for vocals. RVox has been used on pretty much every vocal recording and voiceover I've done for the past few years. Typically, I don't use it as a primary compressor for the vocals, but I use it as a second gentle compressor, and then use the gate to cut out bleed and lower breaths in between phrases.
I don't want to know. Now that you're sober, don't tell me that it's over. Don't turn this ship around and tell me that you can't give one more day. Don't ever tell me why. Don't you ever tell me why. 'Cause I don't want to know. Now that you're
Number
sober,
5, Waves API 2500. There are a lot of Waves hardware models that I'm really not a fan of, but the API 2500 is not one of those. Waves really did a great job with their API 2500 model. This has been my go-to bus compressor for a long time now. In particular, it's great as a bus compressor for drums and other transient heavy material, but I find myself using it on all sorts of stereo sources: acoustic guitar, electric guitar buses, backing vocal groups, as well as a mastering comp. If I had to pick one compressor plugin that works for everything, it would be the API 2500, and that's why this plugin is still on my list. Number 6, Valhalla Shimmer. Shimmer is a very unique sounding pitch-shifting reverb plugin that's perfect for ethereal soundscapes and ambient vibes. I constantly find myself using this plugin on synthesizers and ambient vocals and guitar sounds. This thing is an absolute dream for creating unique soundscapes even out of the driest audio sources. Number 7, EastWest Spaces 2. With Shimmer, I used it for creating ethereal soundscapes. Spaces 2 is more practical. It's a convolution reverb that's perfect for reproducing the reverb and ambience of real-life spaces. This is because Spaces 2 uses over 1,000 of the best recorded impulse responses you'll find anywhere. Impulse responses are created by acoustically mapping and deconvolving the sound of a real-life acoustic space. Churches, concert halls, opera houses, rooms, studios, stages. All these real-life spaces are captured in this plugin. This is why it's replaced Valhalla Vintage Verb this year. It's simply the best reverb I've ever used. Number 8. iZotope Nectar 3. Nectar 3 is the long-awaited follow-up to Nectar 2, and it's an all-in-one vocal production plugin that contains pitch correction, compression, a de-esser, delay, dimension effects like chorus flanger and phaser, an EQ, a gate, a harmony engine, reverb, and a saturation unit. Now given, I don't use all of the modules, but I'll touch on my favorites. The compressor gives you visual control over dynamics in your vocals, and it has 4 modes: digital, vintage, optical, and solid state. The EQ even rivals the dynamic EQ in Neutron in that it can be dynamic, but also a frequency dynamic EQ. If you want your bands to follow the vocal melody, Nectar can actually do that. The gate is a nice touch, but I typically find myself using the RVox gate instead. And the dimension and harmony modules are great for thickening up your vocal tracks, not to mention being able to create up to 8 harmonies with the newly updated harmony engine. I used to use Neutron for vocals and the Antares Choir plugin for dimension effects, and then if I wanted to use delay in the vocals, I'd use Waves H Delay. Nectar 3 has effectively replaced all 3 of those plugins for me for vocals, and on top of all that, there's a really handy vocal assistant that will create a good starting point for your vocals. Number 9. iZotope Ozone 8 Advanced. Since the last top 10 video, I've made the move up to Ozone 8 Advanced. But in addition to improving the current tools in Ozone, they've also added the Spectral Shaper, which I find really useful to cut out unwanted frequency buildup in mastering or even on individual channels and buses. And also included is the Tonal Balance Control plugin, which is super helpful to reference your mixes and masters. And you can also import other tracks into Ozone to use as a mastering reference. For mastering, I find myself mostly using the Exciter, Dynamic EQ, and the Multiband Imager, and then pairing these with GULLFOSS, the API 2500, and the Pro-L limiter for my typical mastering chain. Then I use Tonal Balance Control to check the balance of my master. In addition, I find the vintage tape nice for tape saturating my drum, guitar, and vocal buses, and I use the Spectral Shaper quite a bit to cut out unwanted resonating frequencies in masters, buses, and on individual tracks. And lastly, number 10, Soundtoys Decapitator. I've actually used Decapitator quite a bit in the past, but it never quite made it on the list until now. Decapitator is a saturation and distortion plugin, which you would think would limit its uses, but not this plugin. It has so many uses. In particular, I pretty much always have it on my bass tracks to saturate and pull up the mid-range harmonics in bass guitar, and lately it's always been sitting on my guitar bus as well. It also works great to saturate thin vocal recordings, or you can also use it as an intentional distortion effect. Alright, so those are my top 10 plugins for mixing and mastering for 2018. These are the 10 plugins that I consistently find myself using on all of my mixes lately. I'll leave a link to each one as well as a link to all of my social media in the video description below. If you like this video, please leave it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to see more audio and music production tutorials. You can also support the channel and view new videos early over at patreon.com/MusicTechHelpGuy. As always, thanks for the support and thanks for watching.